goodness, what was that?
So you go ahead and keep looking, Joseph.
Yeah.
I'm going to start off with a couple of announcements,
Sure.
and then we'll come back to that in just a minute. All right. Okay, so I don't have a lot in the way of announcements, but as people come in, if you have any issues you want to discuss or pull requests or anything like that, please bring those up when I'm done with the announcements. I went through the list of everything that's happened in the last week. It seems like there's been a lot of activity, but most of it has been more on the side of chapter committee changes that generally don't need discussion in this group unless people would like to, which is perfectly fine. We are inside the 2-week deadline for the next meeting, so I didn't expect to have a lot of changes, but there are still quite a few things on the editor pass board. So if those are assigned to you, please keep working on those. If they're not and you'd like to help, I'm sure the person that does have it assigned to them would like to have the help. I was going to read the very small changes that were made in the officer elections based on the feedback last week, and a couple of other comments on the pull request. Just to make sure folks are happy with that, so we can go ahead and get that done at the next meeting. And other than that, there's not a lot more. We did get all the announcements in for the June meeting for votes, and it looks like we're going to have a very large ballot, something on the order of 25 to 30 votes. So I'm glad we'll be doing it electronically this time. That'll help move things along. And I think I've stalled for time enough. So Joseph, do you have or did anybody else have anything they wanted to bring up before we start on Joseph's thing?
So I wanted to just mention that there was a comment on the embiggerment ticket that the MPI type get envelope and MPI type get contents functions. There was a question about whether they should have been embiggered differently to the way they were. And I've discussed it with Martin Ruffenacht, who's the only person who's available today to do that. We've come to the conclusion that we think it's a no detriment change to do it, the change the way that has been suggested. There's a small possibility that that's a good change to do, but there's no bad reason for doing it. You know, so we're probably Martin's making the change. That will probably become part of the pull request, and we will probably then need a no votes. It's too late to announce that for the June meeting, and so we'll do it for the second vote meeting. But I just wanted to mention it here because there's a few people around, just to warn and basically to ask them.
You can still do the no vote for this meeting. You can do that at any time.
Right. Okay. So we might do that then.
I think that would make sense just to get it out of the way instead of let people forget about it for 3 months.
Yeah. Okay. So we'll do it that way then. Sure.
Okay.
That's it from me.
Okay. Anybody else?
I don't know whether it's the the right group of people, but for the there's one editor pass ticket with operation semantics, where I'm not quite sure whether that applies to the tools chapter. So there's one part where it says all calls in this section / chapter have local semantics. Does that count as into put it into or have an index, have that part indexed? Or is it like operations like point-to-point communication, IO, something like that? I'm not quite sure whether.
So personally, I would say yes, that does count. That's its function is MPI procedure semantics rather than MPI operation semantics, but I wouldn't mind seeing that in the index along with everything else. Yes.
Okay. Thanks.
Okay. If anybody else has anything, you can send a chat message or something. But Joseph, I've pushed you off far enough now, so I think
We
it's your
can
turn.
do, yeah, we can do the other things before as
I don't
well.
know that there are any other things.
Oh, I thought you wanted to read the rules.
Oh yeah, I can go after you. Go ahead.
Okay. So that's issue 285. I don't know if you want to.
Yeah, I gave you the screen share thing, so you can just put it up
Okay,
if you don't mind.
I guess I should share my whole screen, see if that works. If I want to oh, there's the entire screen. Okay, let's see if that works. You guys see my screen now?
Yep, see myself again.
Okay. So there was this discussion about the examples and how the formatting around the examples is currently. And my issue is that it's basically impossible to distinguish where an example ends and where regular text begins. So we decided to look at different ways of visually marking examples, basically the text range of an example. And I put up different options. I played around with text a little bit. It's not particularly well executed, I guess, but this is one option. I hope you see the PDF. So this is an option where I just put a gray box around it. That makes it easy to see where it ends and where a new one begins.
So I have a quick question on this one.
Yeah.
So the gray box goes around the code block in addition to some prose below it. Was
Yes.
that already part of the example, or did you have to go and manually add that for the rest of the text?
No, the text was in the example environment.
Okay.
All I did was put a gray box around the example environment.
Okay. Okay.
And that's the issue, right? You don't know what is normative text and what is example.
Right. Yeah, I would never have known the difference.
Yeah. There's another issue that I found while going through these is that we're inconsistent when it comes to indentation at the beginning of the text block following the code. So with some examples, it's not indented. With some examples, it is indented. That depends on whether there is a blank line in the LaTeX code. So I made the small change to remove all the indentation inside the example environment to make it coherent. We can change that again. So that is one option. There's another option. I personally find the complete gray thing a little invasive, but that's just my taste. Some people said they like it. Here's another one. No, let me see.
It was on page 46.
46. Okay. Okay, so this is just a frame. It's still it still helps distinguish. I'm on page 46 now. Yeah. I don't really like just having just the frame. And especially if an example crosses page boundaries, that looks pretty ugly. So I wouldn't advocate for that one. I just put it in because it's one way to do it. There is another one with basically boundaries top and bottom. So that looks like this. So we have these demarcations at the beginning and the end. I like better frame. It's another option. And then there was the smallest one where I just marked the upper left and lower right corner. That was my creative side trying to do something. And the point basically was that whatever we do, we have to do something. Even if it's just a little corner thing there, it helps distinguish where examples and regular text starts. So those were the three things that I could come up with. If anyone has other ideas, I'm happy to implement them. There was, once I figured out how to use the T-color box, I think that what I'm using right now. Once I figured that out, it was pretty straightforward to implement other things. And of course, we can adjust the colors and the opacity, especially if we talk about the gray box here. You might want to make this even lighter gray, although I have no clue how well that prints. So once we print the books, if it comes out well, or to which degree of opacity it comes out well, I have no idea.
I would have one more suggestion.
Yeah.
I voted so far for the gray because I find it really easy over page breaks to see immediately that there's an example starting, which I would miss when there's just a marker on the lower button. But we could have something like a line on the border of the right or left side.
Yeah, not the lower. Yeah, that's true.
Just on the right and on the left, and then maybe with a bit of indentation also.
Yeah, that's. I can try that.
One of the things I don't like about the gray is that the parentheses on line, whatever it is, 3 here, 2-ish, actually grazes the edge of the thing. It shows up when we're pushing the margins. It's unfortunate.
Oh, yeah, that's the point. Yeah.
Yeah, I just saw that too.
I didn't
Yeah,
see
I
that.
agree with that.
Yeah, good catch.
But it's also helpful to see the page breaks when you have just a single line going to the next page, like in one of the examples on
absolutely.
5.2 or whatever.
Absolutely. That's so your idea. I would always vote for the left-hand edge because then we're less likely to be pushing the left-hand margin than the right one. The right-hand one, we're always going to be, this IR thing at the end. It's always going to be that side that would overlap with the line if we put a line that side. So let's put it the other side.
And do you think it should be gray or should we keep it black? Because I think right now everything's black or white. We don't have grayscale anywhere except for the draft, but that's not official.
It would definitely make the examples easier to read if you made the background black. Yes.
No.
Would definitely reduce how controversial. Definitely reduce how controversial they were.
No, I mean lines. If we're just talking about lines,
I reckon.
I think I would have to see an example of a gray line or a black line, because then if it's too prominent, then it looks like there's some additional text between all the examples, Yeah. But you want to have it the other way around. You want to have the text to be something prominent, and then the example is something that adds on to it. But I also like the left-hand edge suggestion. And other than that, I was favoring the one with just the corners because it's closest to like the advice to users, end of advice to users that we and like rationals and end of rationals and that we have on other places. So it kind of is close to that visually.
On
But
the
I
other
think
hand, if we're improving the formatting of these examples, perhaps improving the formatting of those rationale and advice to users thing is, as long as this is a relatively simple thing to change. I'm not trying to add a ton of work for somebody, but that might be something that is worth investigating.
Yeah, that's not a big problem. Yeah.
By the way, I did print it out, just not the whole thing, obviously, just one page, just to see how it would look with the grayscale and the gray box, and it is completely readable. It's not a problem, at least in my simple printer. I don't have a book version, obviously, but it looks fine to me, other than I guess there's probably a little more ink put on the page, but I'm not going to print out the MPI standard, so it doesn't matter to me.
Well, someone has to eventually.
Well,
that's an
maybe.
assertion, yeah.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, I know there is at least one person that does that. I'm not sure it's required, but you can.
So
I guess we can also make two versions, or a print and the online version, because the print version does not also include the hyperlinks. So
true. That's true. We could make some slight tweaks. Although again, I think the print version looks fine with the box, and it's not as if it's extremely prominent, but it does make it very clear what part is the example and what part isn't. And I think it would also be helpful for the other non-normative sections.
So you're saying that I should I can provide a version where the advice to users, advice to implementers is put in a box as well. Should we keep the margin there on the left side, or is that not needed because it's in a box anyway?
Yeah, that's a good point. I mean, we would need to do, like Jan was pointing out, we would need to do whatever it takes to make it not run out of the bounding box. I don't know. I personally don't think it would be required anymore. I think a lot of these, we probably would want to get some feedback from Bill, since he's generally the LaTeX owner. To my eye, I don't think it's required. The only other thing is, on a page like what you have on the screen now, it might start to look a little odd when everything is in these boxes. Because even when you were showing an example of a page that had multiple examples on it, and you ended up with everything inside these boxes, that does start to look a little odd. But I do appreciate that it really calls out, this is normative, this is an example, this is advice.
Yeah. I can put up a version that has it, and we can compare.
So I guess my suggestion would be, we've had some good conversation here, and once you have a version that you're comfortable with, I would circulate it on the forum website, even if you don't attach the PDF, because I don't know what the limits on attachments are. Just pointing to this issue to be able to have people, or pointing to the links on this issue to let people take a look. You'd probably get a lot more feedback that way.
Yeah.
I don't know if you want a lot more feedback or not. You may just want targeted feedback from specific people.
It's good to get feedback by people who will have to read it. So
sure, of course. So you definitely would want to get some feedback from Bill. You might also want to get some feedback from Rolf if he's planning to still continue to print the book version.
Yeah.
I don't know what his plan is for the future on that, but that would probably be helpful.
Okay.
But thank you. I think this does improve the readability quite a bit. I think all of them help. I have my preferences, but I think all of them are good.
One other option would be to, I think the OpenMP standard has they are marking, what was it? I think they are marking the interfaces with basically a horizontal line and then pointers up and down. So one of the options that I had where I marked the bottom and the top and the bottom that is similar to the OpenMP. I think I'll check and see if I can replicate that if we want that.
There's a bit of a difference, I think, to OpenMP that we have. OpenMP has different interfaces for the different languages sometimes, like in the work share and the for loop. And they have to make it really clear what is different because there's a full page maybe.
Yeah.
I think the new version of the bindings that comes from Pythonization does help to clarify a lot of the text around bindings, where we have the blocks for C and Fortran and FO8. We could do some additional formatting there just because it looks nice, but I don't know that it's as functionally necessary there.
Nah, for the bindings, probably not. Yeah, but okay.
If somebody just wants to try and make the standard prettier and improve our typesetting and all those other things, you're certainly welcome to do so. But I don't know.
I'm not sure. I'm not sure about the boundaries that I'm pushing there, because it's been traditionally quite conservative when it comes to typesetting, I think. So I don't want to overdo.
Yeah, I don't know how much of that is a function of nobody making an effort or because that is a conscious choice. But I'm fine with looking at things. We can always make a decision as a group. Okay. Well, thank you very much.
Thanks for the feedback.
Anything else anybody wants to discuss? I was going to do as long as we're here, I was going to show the quick changes I made for the elections.
I would have an issue which is not on the pull requests yet, but what I was thinking about.
That's fine. Go ahead.
I was looking over this MPI card create, or in the terms of this card create stuff which we are proposing in the ticket 120. There was this card dims get and card get function to get topology information. And there was one advice to the implementers, which was a bit confusing for me, which is, I will have to look it up. Give me a minute. So that's just. Yeah, so it's in the chapter of MPI card.
It can be implemented in terms of cart map and then com split.
Yes, exactly. I will bring up a standard if you give me the.
Basically, the resulting communicator should be the same as the one created with cart map, cart create, except that we don't have the information about dimension and periodicity.
So if you have a pointer, I can put it on the.
Doing good. I'm listening to the MPI forum.
Yeah. Can I get a pointer? Then I'll share just what I mean.
Oh, yeah. I think you can probably just share and it'll work, but just in case I gave it to you.
I'm not sure. Raise hand.
You should be able to just click on the share content bubble.
We lost Christoph.
He's still here. You just muted. Oh, now there's two of them.
Now there's two of them.
So, crash, sorry. Was too much, I tried again.
That's okay.
So for those who have the standard, the document, it's on page 313.
Depending which version you're looking at. Yeah.
Version 3.1, the latest official version. Excuse me. It's the advice to implementers from line 7 to 13.
Page 333 in the 2019 4.0 draft from Supercomputing 2019. But yeah, whatever.
Okay. Seems I don't have luck with the sharing. I don't know.
I can just share.
Okay. So it's on page 313. Okay.
Yeah, I have
of the 3.1 standard.
Section 7.5 topology constructors.
Yeah.
And 7.5.8 low-level topology functions, cart map.
Yeah, so there's described that with the MPI cart map, you can reconstruct the behavior of several other Cartesian communication creation functions. But actually, the topology information cannot be passed to the communicator, which is created at this place. So here, for example, you have the MPI cart create, which is created by this MPI cart map, where you put in the dims, NDIMs and DIMs, and the periods, and then you use a com split, for example, with the coloring later on. And there you cannot, there you use only the coloring which you obtained by the cart map for the keys, for example, but the dimensions are lost, and you cannot recreate them at this point.
So this is an advice to implementers. It's not an advice to users. It isn't saying that you can replace lexically a call to cart create with these two other calls. It is telling implementers that the work that is done by the cart map, followed by the work that is done by the com split, is the work that you need in order to implement the cart create function. I think this is certainly not trying to say to users that the cart create function is not needed. You can lexically replace it with this. That's clearly not what it's saying.
Yeah, it's not for the users, but even when I'm on the implementer side and I would read it, I would now pose up the question if I have to implement it exact in this way that is equivalent, and then I get stuck how to implement the passing of the information. So
it says can, not must. And it's this is really old stuff, and it says can. It was supposedly we were showing how they were related long ago, and notice it doesn't say must, otherwise it would be normative. So therefore it's just advice, and so I think that worrying that it makes you do it that way is certainly not true.
Yeah, I don't think this is particularly needs changing, but I see your point. But if an implementer thought that was a prescription for how to implement this thing, then effectively this is trying to say that cart create is syntactic sugar over these other two functions.
We actually had this debate in MPI1 in my group, and okay, we actually had this debate about whether it was syntactic sugar or not at the MPI1, and we decided specifically to keep these, even though you could argue that in some sense some of them are syntactically sugary compared to the fundamental operations. It was a decided strategy to retain them, even though this exact words were used, Dan. So I think the answer is maybe it's crept into the wording of the advice about some people. I'm sorry about that. I'm not sure who wrote this, but okay. But yes, sure. Sort of we saw at the end, oh, we don't really need those, but everyone liked Ralph Hempel's proposal a lot and liked Ralph Hempel, and they do seem pretty cool, and so that's the end of the story, and we kept them. So you may be seeing that reading between the lines, but
yeah, sometimes I can expect what or can try to figure out what was the intention initially, and it helps also to think about new ways to create here communicator, for example. Yeah, but it was a bit confusing. And the next question would for me be if I can think about a way to improve this, like to pass the topology information with a new call, maybe. Yeah, which is
No, I think the best way.
you could create more communicators, but it's not possible to pass topology informations then with this interface. So maybe.
No, I think the right way to fix this would be to change the wording such that you added a little bit here that said as long as the Cartesian topology information was associated with or cached on the output communicator, or something like that. Basically, you have to do some work here, implementer. Right? It's not. Don't just call this function, then call this function, expect the result is correct. It's not. You have to do a little bit of work. It's eliding that little extra piece of work. But if the implementer has actually read this bit of the standard that defines what cart create should produce, then they should recognize that there's a piece missing here and implement it.
I see the point. You can add the word naively. Okay.
It's not even
naively, and then you stop.
Not correct. Yeah, but it's not correct to do just these two functions and stop. Yeah. Right? There is this extra piece of work which is not mentioned here, which is, the implementer should be aware of, because otherwise why are they implementing MPI if they can't, if they don't pick that up from the definition of cart create, that there should be a Cartesian topology on it when it's finished, then, they probably ought to be reading it more carefully. This isn't a prescription for how to create this function. It's just indicating you've already implemented some of the work that's needed here by doing this function and this function. Just do the contents of those, and then patch it up so that it's a real Cartesian coordinate communicator. I think you could add a sentence saying as long as the attach the Cartesian topology that you get from this thing to there, and whatever.
It can be partially implemented by calling cart map and then calling complete.
Yeah, or you can reuse infra or whatever. Reuse parts you used for.
Can be implemented by reusing the functionality of would be a better statement. Yes. So I think that the thing that occurred to me when reading this in terms of relation to the ticket you mentioned is there probably ought to be an MPI cart weighted map, or a map weighted, or whichever way around you want to call it, because there is an MPI cart create weighted. There should also be an MPI cart map weighted, with the extra parameters in order to do exactly this, right? To reuse that function as the guts of the implementation for the MPI cart create weighted that's being proposed. You can't get that implementation from these two functions. You'd have to extend cart map with the extra parameters. I think there's an obvious extension. Just cut paste this text, add the extra stuff that it's a fairly small addition, but it would certainly improve the proposal.
Yeah, I'm always a bit hesitating when adding more and more functions. So
But I think it should exist for exactly the same reason that cart map exists.
Okay. Yeah.
So the last thing was my minor changes for the officer elections. Were you done? Sorry, I didn't mean to.
Yeah, well, it's done.
Okay.
With all the feedback.
Okay,
and,
good.
Look back in history.
So yeah, I made some minor changes for the officer elections based on the feedback. Everything I changed was basically the same as what we discussed during the meeting last week, but I did make a few more based on some feedback from Jeff. Again, most of this is minor and not interesting, but there were a couple of more, I guess, important or impactful changes here around the around the way nominations happen for new officers if a position is vacated, and especially if the position is vacated close to the next meeting. So first, I changed the wording for how officers can be removed if that is necessary. It would follow the same rules as it would take to elect a new officer, and rather than repeating that, I made a pointer to the description of those rules further down. But the new part is that if an officer is vacates a position within 4 weeks, and I just somewhat arbitrarily chose 4 weeks because I thought that would give enough time. It would give at least 2 weeks to hold nominations, although I'm certainly open to other thoughts if somebody has others. That would, so if a position is vacated within 4 weeks of the next voting meeting, nominations would open immediately, but the election wouldn't occur until the meeting after the next meeting. So so that way you would have more than more than just a week or two to hold any nominations and to think about the who somebody might want to elect. Is there any feedback or opposition, or does anybody want to see this as a longer period? I was trying to kind of strike a balance between giving folks enough time, but also not making it unnecessarily long for how long a position would need to remain vacant while we elect the next person to fill it. All right, I will take silence as that's fine with me. That was basically what was changed. There were some other things based on the conversation we had, which unfortunately I merged into the previous commit, so they're not quite as obvious. I think we can look at that here. Oh gosh, nope. There, the formatting was all changed, so the diffs look very large. So if folks would like to see the difference between what I read last week and what's there now, you're welcome to do so. All of this text was in before the 2-week deadline, so it doesn't actually require a no-no, and I will be rereading it, of course, at the meeting in a couple of weeks. But unfortunately,
I think there's a way to not show white space changes if it's just a formatting.
I think this is more than just white space. I think I reflowed some of the paragraphs. Okay. So it would be larger than that. So it looks like a lot of change. I think I just wasn't thinking about the fact that I might want to show this again later. So when I made the changes, I reflowed everything in Vim. But of course, I will be reading this again at the next meeting, so you will have an opportunity to hear this, and of course, anybody can look at it anytime. But if you were at the meeting last week, it was basically everything that I listed there, or everything that was brought up then. So that was... So Dan had made some suggestions about chapter committees having the ability to review the document. We added the procedure. I added the procedure to remove an officer. We changed the major release cycle to any release. So we'll re-elect officers, or we will elect officers, whether it's a re-elect or a new officer, after every release. There's some rationale here to explain why we did that, and that historically we have chosen to keep people around longer than one minor release, and why. I added a little rationale at the bottom about why the voting mechanism I chose is the one I chose, just because I was trying to find something that's relatively simple and works well in the common case. And clarifying that when nominations open, for how long, when they close, and what happens when it would be necessary for them to reopen. I think there was a bunch of confusion around that. So hopefully I've made all of that more clear. So feel free to take a look at all that again. Obviously there's a lot of changes, but hopefully that makes everything more clear for folks. So that's all from me. And I don't think there's anything else on the GitHub issues that I saw that needed to be discussed. Unless somebody else wants to bring anything up, we can probably adjourn early.
Since Dan is here, can we quickly talk about this example ticket?
Sure.
There is actually this is now in the point-to-point working group.
Is there something you want to show, or do you want to just take this to the working group?
I know. Then is that okay if we discuss it here, or should we take this offline?
I don't mind. It's probably not worth bothering everybody with,
Okay.
unless we're at that stage. I don't think we're at that stage yet. So, do you want to do that separately? We can do it maybe. Let's arrange a time by email or something, unless you immediately. But
okay.
Okay. So for next week, I don't expect there to be a lot of changes in terms of things that people are getting ready for the upcoming meeting, since we're already inside the deadline. So I will tentatively say we probably won't be having that meeting next week unless something comes up that people want to discuss, in which case please send email early to the mailing list. But I think we can plan on not holding the meeting next week unless we have a pressing issue that comes up that somebody wants to discuss.
There's also ISC Online next week.
Oh, yeah, that's a good point. I forgot about that. So all the more reason to not hold the meeting next week. And then we will meet for the virtual meeting in 2 weeks, or a little less than 2 weeks. If you haven't registered, please go do that. Also, keep in mind that you do actually need to show up. I know for the people that are in the call, that's probably not a problem because you are here. But I'm going to have to more strictly enforce the rules about being present at a meeting. That's easy at a physical meeting. It's more difficult at a virtual meeting. But because we have so many people, we can really screw with our quorum rules if we just let everybody register but not show up. We had about, I think, 4 or 5 people not actually attend at the last meeting. So we need to make sure we keep track of that, which I'll do. And I think we're done. So thanks for coming, everybody, and we'll talk in a couple of weeks.
Good day.
Okay. See you in 2 weeks then.
Okay, thanks. See you in 2 weeks. Bye.
Yeah.
thanks. Bye.